Today's case is a true story, but it resembles a horror movie. Every detail is documented in the files of the London police. However, when you hear it, you might not believe how strange it is, almost illogical. Unfortunately, everything in this story is 100% true. The story begins on a night in London in the year 1840, nearly 200 years ago, with a 30-year-old Englishman named Sir Robert Wars. He belonged to the aristocracy, part of London's upper class. Robert and 5 of his friends arrived at an old, ornately designed house. One of those marble houses located in one of the most prestigious residential neighborhoods in London, England. The address of the house was number 50, Leicester Square. This area was incredibly upscale, inhabited only by the wealthy. The streets were well organized, lit with beautiful lighting, and all the houses were marble, intricately designed, and aesthetically pleasing. A large garden surrounded the square. Most of these houses were built about 100 years before the events of the story, meaning about 300 years before today. Robert and his friends didn't come to the house for a visit, they came because of a dare. Although Robert looked noble and wore luxurious clothing, he led a reckless life and had a strange obsession with accepting challenges. Anyone could challenge him to do anything, even strangers, and he would accept without hesitation, simply to prove to himself and others that he could do it. He wasn't motivated by money, but by the thrill and excitement of adventure. That night, he came with his 5 friends to fulfill a challenge they had given him. When he reached the door of the house, he knocked, then turned to his friends standing behind him. Some were excited, while others were nervous and uneasy. The door was opened by a 50-year-old man named Charles Benson. He knew Robert from before, though only on a surface level, as both were members of a private club for noblemen. They weren't close friends, but they were acquainted. Charles was known in London for the strange things that happened in his house. When he opened the door and saw Robert and his friends, he was a little surprised but not entirely. He had been informed in advance about the challenge. There was a moment of silence, which Robert broke by saying, "Do you remember the challenge we told you about a few days ago?" Charles looked at him with a mix of surprise and tension and said, "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Robert glanced at the pistol in his pocket and replied confidently, "Yes, I'm sure." Robert and his friends entered the house and sat in the dining room. The tension and fear were visible on their faces. After a few minutes, Charles went upstairs to retrieve something while Robert tried to ease the mood by cracking jokes. Charles returned with an old iron key, which he placed on the table without saying a word. Then he said, "I haven't used this key in more than 10 years, since I bought this house. I only used it 2 or 3 times to open a certain room, then hid it in a secret place so it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands." He then looked at Robert and said, "Here is the key. If you insist, go ahead." Robert quickly grabbed the key, thrilled. Charles and the others followed him through a narrow hallway on the ground floor, with a tight staircase that only allowed one person at a time. They climbed to the upper floor and walked down another hallway until they reached a door that had been locked for years. It was an old wooden door, clearly neglected. Everyone noticed something strange. Charles, despite being the homeowner, was visibly nervous and refused to approach the door. He only pointed at it from a distance, refusing to even look at it or touch it, which deeply unsettled everyone. What made the situation even more tense was that Robert's friends began backing away, one by one, moving toward Charles and leaving Robert standing alone in front of that room and its door. Although they were the ones who had dared him and bet him to go there in the first place, now signs of hesitation and fear were starting to show on their faces. As for Robert, he didn't feel afraid at all. He held the key tightly, inserted it into the old lock, and began to open the door. As soon as he started turning it, all his friends stepped back, watching him nervously and fearfully from a distance. The moment the door opened, Charles and the 5 friends looked shocked, as if they couldn't believe Robert was really going through with it. They started thinking he had lost his mind. Robert could hear their comments behind him, but he ignored them. He opened the door slightly to peek inside the room. When he took a cautious look inside, he started laughing. It was just an ordinary room. It smelled like an old abandoned space, a mix of aged wood and neglected carpet. The furniture was old, but it looked elegant and neatly arranged. On one side of the room was a large wooden wardrobe with round windows, and on the other side, an old iron-framed double bed. Hanging above the bed was a red cord known as a bell pull, the kind used in wealthy homes in the past to call servants. It was connected to the servants' quarters, where a bell would ring when pulled. When Robert got a better view of the room, he opened the door fully and stepped inside. At that moment, someone grabbed his arm from behind. He turned around and saw that it was Charles, visibly nervous and sweating. Charles said seriously, "Robert, that's enough. You've made it this far. There's no need to continue. Please, stop now and end this. I won't be responsible for what might happen." But Robert smiled at Charles, then turned to his friends and said, "I know exactly what I want to do. I'm going to sleep in this room tonight, and I'll see you all in the morning, after I win this bet. Get your money ready, and prepare a story you'll be telling for years." What Robert didn't know was that they would indeed have a great story to tell, but he would be the main character in it. Robert closed the door behind him, then locked it from the inside. His friends began hearing his footsteps moving around inside the room. They were in complete shock. They hadn't truly believed he'd go through with the challenge. It was like daring someone to jump from a great height, and watching them actually do it. Then guilt began to creep in. What if Robert got hurt? They would be responsible. They looked at Charles, hoping for reassurance, but instead saw deep concern and fear on his face as well. He said, "There's something else I want to show you. Come with me." They followed him through the same hallway, down the narrow stairs, and past the dining room, until they reached a small corridor that led to a second building connected to the main house. This building was the servants' quarters. Charles said, "This is where the servants who work for me live. But today, I gave them the day off because I knew you were coming, and wanted Robert to stay in that room overnight while you remained in the house. So I asked the staff to leave, to make space for you." Then he showed them something mounted on the wall above the beds, a wooden panel from which several bells were hanging. Under each bell was the name of the room it was connected to. Charles pointed at one particular bell. "This is the bell for the room Robert is in. Tonight, you must not sleep. Take turns watching this bell. If it rings, that means Robert is asking for help, and he might be in serious trouble." The friends nodded in agreement, and their long night began. 3 hours passed. Midnight struck. The 5 friends were sitting in the servants' quarters, silently playing a game of blackjack, all their focus on the bell. They watched it closely. The sound of it ringing could mean disaster. Fear and tension grew inside them as they asked themselves, "What have we gotten ourselves into? Why did we challenge him in the first place? What kind of horror is this?" But they continued playing in silence, until they heard a sound that terrified them all. It wasn't the bell. It was a loud scream from upstairs, a real scream of terror. They stared at one another, then quickly stood up, dropped their cards, and ran toward the main house. Suddenly, the bell for Robert's room began ringing non-stop, as if he were yanking the pull cord frantically. They ran as fast as they could and met Charles, who had also woken up from the scream. They all rushed upstairs to the second floor, where the room was located. All the way there, the bell didn't stop ringing, adding to their panic and filling them with dread. But just as they reached the door, everything stopped. The bell stopped ringing. The screams ended. No footsteps could be heard from inside. No movement. No sound. They started calling out for Robert, but there was no response. When one of them reached for the doorknob, they suddenly heard a loud explosion from inside the room. Everyone stepped back in terror, unable to understand what was happening. Then, silence again. They tried to open the door, but it was locked from the inside. They began shouting Robert's name, kicking the door with all their strength. Charles stood at a distance, covering his ears in fear, unable even to touch the door. Finally, the door broke open. The door was wooden and nearly 100 years old. It did break, and the 5 friends rushed into the room. Charles never stepped inside with them. What the 5 saw first upon entering the room shocked them deeply, an image that would stay etched in their memories for the rest of their lives. It was a sight one could never forget. But before revealing what they saw on the bed, let me share something essential to understanding this story. About 10 years before Charles bought this house, he used to hear the neighbors talking about a dark story related to its past, specifically about the house's former owner. They said the previous owner was an elderly man who lived there with his family, and he had a brother who suffered from a severe mental disorder and was extremely violent. Because of this brother's behavior, the man had no choice but to lock him in one of the rooms, the very same room where Robert would later spend the night. The neighbors used to hear that brother screaming all night, trying to get out of the room. But he was not allowed to leave. Even food was handed to him quickly before the door was immediately shut again. After several years, that brother died inside the same room, and ever since his death, very strange things began to happen, not just in the room but throughout the entire house. These occurrences drove the previous owner and his family to the brink of insanity. They heard screaming and banging on the walls, noises identical to those made by the now-deceased brother, despite his death. The furniture in the room would move and scatter by itself, even though the room was securely locked from the outside, ensuring no one could enter. Visitors also reported witnessing something extremely bizarre, a gray, faceless entity that appeared only in that room, especially after midnight. Anyone who stayed in that room overnight saw this entity, and never returned again. Most of those who saw it witnessed it reflected in the large round mirrors inside the wardrobe. It would appear behind them in the reflection, but when they turned around, nothing would be there. The family eventually got used to seeing this entity, as did their neighbors. They named it the Nameless Thing. They believed it was a manifestation of evil, or a demon in visible, physical form. Because every time it was seen, a disaster or unexplained death would follow. Although the previous family shared what they had experienced, some people believed them, and others didn't. Among the skeptics was Charles, who later bought the house. Driven by curiosity, he opened the room's door to see it for himself, and what he saw terrified him. He witnessed the furniture shifting on its own, and saw the same gray shadow everyone had described. Horrified, he locked the room and never opened it again. Among the disbelievers was Robert, the main character of our story, one of Charles's friends. Robert always told his friends that what Charles said was nonsense, just tales to scare people. So they told him, if you don't believe it, take the challenge and spend a whole night in that room. Robert agreed immediately and asked Charles for permission. Charles hesitated at first, but eventually allowed it. Robert believed his night would be completely normal, but unfortunately, he was wrong. At dawn the next day, his friends heard a scream from the room, along with the bell ringing frantically. When they rushed upstairs, the first thing they noticed was that the red pull cord hanging from the ceiling had torn off and fallen onto the bed. It was clear Robert had pulled it so hard that he ripped it from its place. They found his pistol on the floor, and next to the wardrobe there was a hole in the wall. evidence that a bullet had been fired in that direction, confirming that the explosion sound they had heard earlier was indeed a gunshot. And on the bed, they found Robert lying stiff, completely frozen. His eyes were wide open, as was his mouth, as if he had frozen mid-scream. He was still gripping the bell cord tightly, curled into the fetal position, staring toward the wall. At first, his friends thought it was a seizure or something similar, even though Robert had no history of any health issues. But the moment they touched him, they realized the awful truth: Robert was dead. Charles and Robert's friends immediately called the ambulance and police, and a formal investigation was launched, one that remains archived in official case files in London. The cause of death, according to the police after autopsy, was a heart attack due to extreme shock or terror, despite Robert being under 30 years old. But Charles and the others knew the truth. They were certain that during the night, Robert had begun seeing the gray entity, and that's when he started screaming and ringing the bell. He even fired his gun at it, despite the fact that it was not something physical he could shoot. Finally, overwhelmed with fear, he died. Some might say it was just hallucinations. Maybe he convinced himself something terrifying was there, and imagined it. But Robert was known for his courage and disbelief in superstitions. So, what did he see? What truly killed him? 200 years after that mysterious incident, the ownership of the house changed hands many times, but people continued to report the same phenomena: strange noises, the bell ringing by itself, furniture moving, and the return of the gray shadow, appearing only inside that room. And so, everyone eventually agreed to keep that door shut, to this day. It is now considered one of the most haunted and terrifying rooms in all of London. Did you enjoy this case? As for me, I find no logical explanation for what happened. It's either something supernatural, or something beyond our understanding, especially since there's a real investigation and documented files confirming the event. What do you think? Do you believe what happened to Robert was real? And do you enjoy these kinds of mysterious, paranormal stories? If you liked this story, don't forget to support it with a like, and subscribe for more eerie and thrilling stories in upcoming videos. Sleep well, Crescent Moon.